name is Stuart, and I will be talking about intergovernmental aspects of public budgeting. And if you pay attention, you just might learn something. An important feature of public budgeting in almost all countries is the existence of multiple governments within the same country. The United States is made up of the national government, 50 state governments, and over 87,000 local governments, including cities, counties, and special districts. When those governments have some degree of autonomy from one another, have differing responsibilities, and are subject to different political pressures and incentives, budgetary dynamics may be different from one decision-making arena to another. Although a country could, in theory, have only one government, that approach does not appear to be very practical for nations unless they are very small. Having a number of governments within a country can produce several beneficial effects for the budget process, although some difficulties may result as well. One benefit of having multiple governments is that they can adapt to differing needs or preferences from one part of the country to another. If people in one area are fond of driving, they can budget more generously for highways. If people in another area dislike property taxes, they can rely on other revenue sources instead. This benefit is most likely to result if budgetary decisions reflect public desires or needs. Budgeting by multiple governments can also help officials cope with the complexity of public budgeting and the conflict it generates. Local officials in the U.S. don't need to make many decisions regarding budgeting for defense programs. That responsibility lies primarily with the national government.
Hey Mayor, should we make a budget for the defense program?
Nah. Uncle Sam's got that covered for us. National officials don't struggle with budgeting for fire protection. That burden falls mainly on local officials.
Mr. President, my city is on fire. Use your national funds to help me.
Sounds like a personal problem, kid. Budgeting by multiple governments may help political systems cope with conflict in a number of ways. If different governments adopt different policies, people can seek out the state or community that most closely matches their preferences. Basically, people who are disappointed by the budgetary decisions of one government may take their case to another government. For example, when the national government required states to adopt a 55-mile-per-hour speed limit as a condition of receiving federal highway aid, people who wanted to drive faster were able to convince officials in a number of states and localities to tolerate violations of the law on a considerable scale. Budgeting by multiple governments may also provide a better link between the benefits provided by a program and the cost of providing it. If a new local park will be used primarily by the residents of one community, financing that park at the local level will cause people who use the park to pay for it. If a new highway will largely benefit people in one state, budgeting for that highway at the state level will cause the beneficiaries to also bear the cost. However, if you're the worst state in the country, then you can utilize a turnpike and make anyone that uses that road pay for it, whether they're a state citizen or not. A program that helps on both a local and national level is Amtrak. Amtrak service helps provide mobility for one state, but is also used by some people from other states. Sharing the financial responsibility would be more sensible than if one level of government acted alone. Having a number of governments may also provide competition that will encourage efficiency and responsiveness to the public. If people in one community learn that a neighboring community has comparable services but lower taxes, they are likely to contact their officials and ask why. If citizens find that their local officials do not respond to their needs, those citizens may move to another locality where officials are more responsive. This process works best if people are free to move from one place to another. Having large numbers of governments can also stimulate the development and testing of new approaches for dealing with policy problems. A proposal that is ignored by one community may be adopted in another community. If the proposal is successful, it may be copied by other communities or governments. Officials who face a serious problem often borrow ideas from other governments. One other benefit of having numerous governments is that when a problem is too large for a small unit of government to handle alone, a larger jurisdiction can provide assistance of one form or another. A small community may not be able to establish its own crime laboratory, but might make use of the state police crime lab. Although some aspects of budgetary decision-making may be improved by having numerous governments, they may also create a number of difficulties. Citizens may be confused or overwhelmed by the numerous governments and their even more numerous budgetary decisions. For example, if an angry citizen is unhappy with a public service or program, which officials are responsible?
Man, this program sucks. Does the fault lie with the national government, my state government, the city or county where I live, a special district government or some other state or locality? Can more than one government be responsible? Nah, I know who it is. It's that goddamn Illuminati.
Budgeting in the context of large number of governments may also lead to problems with externalities or spillover effects. which are effects felt in one jurisdiction because of a decision made in another jurisdiction. For example, if a community dumps nuclear waste into a river, that action will affect other communities downstream. One community's nuclear waste is another community's outbreak of mutants. Budgeting by large numbers of governments can create serious coordination problems across governments. A crackdown on crime in one community may cause criminals to shift their activities to another community. If levels of wealth vary from one jurisdiction to another, which is a common phenomenon, problems of inequality will follow. A wealthy community will be able to provide generous funding for schools, libraries, and everything else with modest tax rates. A poor community may levy higher tax rates and still have much less revenue to support public services. As a result, some children may receive a better education than others, and some motorists will drive on better maintained roads than other motorists. Unless, of course, you live in Michigan, in which case the roads will be terrible wherever you go. One of the most striking developments in public budgeting in the U.S. is the heavy reliance of state and especially local governments on grant and aid from higher levels of governments. Roughly 1/5 of state government revenue comes from grants, primarily from the national government, and localities have received about 1/3 of their revenues from grants, primarily from state governments. Grants can be used for a variety of purposes and may have a number of different effects. Grants are sometimes used to correct for externalities. Now, who remembers what externalities are? That is exactly right, whoever just answered that question. Unless, of course, nobody raised their hand, and I had to rely on Pulaski to give me the answer, in which case I am very disappointed in you guys. Grants can also help equalize financial resources. A higher level of government can raise more revenues in wealthier areas and redistribute that revenue to poor areas. Kind of like Robin Hood. This can sometimes provoke controversy. People in wealthier areas may oppose having their tax dollars spent to benefit people in other areas of the state or nation. Conflicts may also erupt over how to measure needs. Should aid to education be based on the number of pupils, or should added funding go to schools having more students with learning disabilities?
How about schools that have more problems with school violence? I get bullied a lot.
Grants can enable higher levels of governments to provide a more uniform standard of service when that seems desirable. When transportation officials wanted to establish a national system of interstate highways with consistent guidelines for clearances, sharpness of curves, and so forth, national grants helped provide that consistency. Grant programs can also help encourage greater creativity and innovation in policymaking. Encouraging innovation probably requires a type of grant that does not provide money for continuing to do what has been done for many years, but that may encourage recipient governments to repackage old programs to appear new and different. This is known as the old wine in new bottles tactic. Grant programs can enable lower levels of government to remain involved in programs that they cannot afford to finance on their own. Many state and local officials find that they cannot fund many major programs without assistance. Sharing of responsibilities helps diffuse the political heat generated by controversial programs such as welfare. Sharing of responsibilities can also produce confusion, however, regarding accountability. Someone might ask who deserves blame for failures or credit for successes. One solution might be to get yourself an accountability buddy. Let's say Butters here is Big Rapids government, and his accountability buddy Bradley is state government. If they share responsibilities, then if one of them makes a mistake, they are both held accountable.
Bradley is your accountability buddy. That makes you accountability buddyable.
Hamburgers.